Nighttime workers of Reddit, what's the freakiest stuff you've seen on the job? I worked at an all-night diner while I was in college. One night at about 2 in the morning, a 4-year-old boy wandered in and said he was there to get some food for him and his little sister because they were hungry. When the manager asked where his parents were, he said they were sleeping at home and that they slept a lot and yelled at him and his sister to be quiet a lot. Turns out he lived at an apartment complex adjacent to the diner, and the parents were addicts. It was heartbreaking. I used to work nights in a hospital setting. At one point, I was taking the city bus to work. There was a lady who got off the bus and left her baby. The bus driver pulled the bus over and tried to find her, but it was nighttime and he couldn't find her. He called the police. Before the police got there, the woman came running back, realizing that she had forgotten Sogrugzing. My boss did not believe me when I told her why I was late. Story 2. I work nights at a dog kennel. During the night, we'd just walk the dogs around the parking lot so they could go to the bathroom. The parking lot was surrounded by a wooded area on most sides. There was a stray cat colony living in the woods behind the parking lot. Every time I'd walk a dog through the parking lot, the cats would sprint away and hide in the woods. They did not like the dogs at all. They were terrified of them. One night I'm walking a dog and I see the cats, but this time they're sprinting out of the woods toward me. All the cats just kind of gather in the middle of the parking lot, completely ignoring the barking dog I had. It definitely freaked me out. What was out in the woods that scared the cats out so much that they came running towards me and a dog they were usually terrified of? It was probably just a few coyotes or Sogrugzing, but it felt really creepy wondering what was scaring the cats so badly just out of view in the woods. Story 3. Was standing topside watch in the Navy at sea on a dark night when the sky suddenly turned bright. For about 3 seconds, Sogrugzing was incoming so bright it lit all the weather decks up like daylight. This caused quite a commotion in the bridge and operations. We were forward deployed during wartime, although not in a region where active fighting was expected. Obviously, everyone's worry was that we might be under attack. Then the sky went dark again just as suddenly as it had began. The only one on the ship who had a direct view was me. It's a meteor. Had to repeat that report with details a bunch of times until people calmed down. The thing broke up into 3 pieces and then vaporized in the atmosphere. It was possibly one of the southern torrids. Right time of year, right part of the globe, and that meteor shower is known for producing fireballs. Being hundreds of nautical miles out on a moonless night, it was truly spectacular. That was far and away the most dramatic meteor I've witnessed, both in terms of the show it put on and in terms of the context. Lucky coincidence to be an astronomy buff standing the right watch at the right moment. Story 4. Worked 3rd shift, stocking shelves in a grocery store. Every couple of nights, a sweet little old lady would come in to buy vanilla extract to make sugar cookies for her grandkids and the neighbors. A few weeks go by, and I'm outside on a smoke break. I see our sweet grandma in her car, chugging vanilla extract. She was drinking it to get drunk and hide her alcoholism from her family. Years after that, I worked in a bar as a karaoke host. There was a hotel next door to the bar where some of the less fortunate people in town stayed. One of the hotel guests was a regular in the bar. This dude, his GF and I did a shot to celebrate him finding a good job and getting accepted to a trailer park. He goes next door to get a snack and says he'll be right back. 30 minutes later, we see flashing lights outside. He got a snack of heroin, passed out in the parking lot next to his car, and had his head run over by another guest pulling into the adjacent parking spot. It bore a similarity to a watermelon at a Gallagher show. Post-finale, I'll never unsee that. Story 5. I grew up on a farm. One night I was supposed to check the irrigation pumps at 2 a.m. It's a 2-mile drive and I'm mostly asleep. I park the truck with the lights aimed at the river. When I get out, the headlights are projecting my shadow on rapid layers of fog coming from the river. Above that, the fog was dissipating into the wildest northern lights display I've ever seen. It was like a sheet being violently shook from one horizon to the other. The farm has no sound or noise pollution. There was nothing else to obscure it. The northern lights have a sound. It's like sand on rough paper. So I took several moments to just take in my silhouette was joined visually to green mist across the sky that filled my vision and my ears. Story 6. I was working overnight at a hotel and a guy came in with an escort, super confidently pours out a little pile of coke on the counter and tells me it's his payment for a room. He was more surprised than anyone should have been when it didn't work. Story 7. Train inspector here, walking a train in the middle of the night, pitch black, come up to a freight car that had 4 hobos sitting in it, just staring at me. Dudes never said a word, just watched me. I eased by them and kept going, but couldn't get past the feeling of them behind me for a good while. The railroad I worked with didn't let guys inspect alone for this reason because they tend to be violent if you catch them. They always said to just let them be if you see them. Some guys carried handguns on them at work because bums have attacked and beat the crap out of workers. I can imagine it'd be creepy at night. Not freaky, but I was sitting on a loading dock at 3 a.m., very dark, smoking a cig, saw a cat and I tried to get it to come over. It did. It wasn't a cat, it was a raccoon, still fed it a cracker. Story 8. I'm a nurse, so I see a lot of freaky stuff working days at the hospital as well. But I used to work nights. There's a common phenomenon amongst dementia patients called sundowning. A dementia patient can be sweet and innocent all day, but once night falls, they do a complete 180 and become agitated and often hostile. Also, more patients die on night shift for some reason. They always seem to want to crash around 3 a.m. Story 9. Not specific to working night shift. I work in a nursing home, and unfortunately, people dying is the name of the game. Sometimes you see people declining, so you know they're on their way out, and you do 15-minute checks on them and catch it fairly quickly. Other times people seem fine and they just go and you don't find them for an hour or so between doing rounds. I once spent a long time trying to convince a resident that the angel of death wasn't waiting for him. I sat with him for a while. We shared a hot cocoa. I checked and double-checked his vitals, did all of his cares, held his hand, and talked to him about life until he felt better. He was smiling and calm again when I left his room. I finally left his room to wrap up charting and to check in with the nurse. He was gone when I checked in about 30 minutes later. That one hit pretty hard. Story 10. I worked as an engineer in Denver. Unfortunately, being security detail came with the job considering the hours 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. I was doing rounds, and we had noticed the previous day that a lock to an electrical room had been removed. It was midwinter last year, and we figured someone was trying to stay warm. As much as I want people less fortunate to get ahead any way they can, it was my job to make sure there wasn't someone occupying some spot on the property. So I go to check on the room. I walk up and notice the doors cracked ever so slightly, pop my flashlight out and beam it in there. Now the room did exactly what it was made for without any budge room. There was maybe slightly less than a foot of space between the wall and the machines that were in there. Thinking it would be impossible for someone to be crammed in there, I do a lazy scan and go to shut the door. As I'm walking down the staircase, I hear a shuffling in there. It's late, there's nothing going on, and I was newish to the city, so seeing owls or big-ass rats was somewhat a thrill. Easily entertained, I guess. So I go back up, pop out the flashlight again, but this time, I crouch down to see the space beneath the machines. Sure enough, I see some legs. I call out to West Court, where it was, and tell them they need to vacate. They stay still for a long moment until they started to wriggle themselves out from the tight space. I stayed there because procedure would be to escort off the block entirely. A woman pops out looking rough as hell and starts muttering absolute nonsense. She's taking her time, and it is pissing snow, so I start to get a little aggravated and tell her to hurry up. Story 11. Worked as an office cleaner before pandemic, 11:07 a.m. as a one-man team. One stormy-ass night, I was on the phone while working when my connection started to fade in and out. All of a sudden, there is just a deafeningly loud shriek coming out my phone, and the power goes out. Even the emergency lights. I remember looking out the window of the 10th and seeing the whole industrial park black. Nights make everything creepy. Story 12. I stocked shelves at Toys R Us overnight for 5 years. One night, the entirety of 3 walls of board games, 5 shelves tall, 3 feet deep, fell to the floor. Everything, except for a single Ouija board. We left early that night. Story 13. I worked the midnight shift at a crappy little gas station and saw a lot of weird stuff. The guy who claimed he was going to hit it big on the lottery, he would come in with an old baseball card album filled with his past lottery tickets, like 10 years worth of old tickets. Each week he had a new scheme, using crystals to divine the numbers, using previous winning number combinations and dividing by specific numbers, etc. The lady who would always pay in pennies for the pack of Camel-Wide non-filter, soft pack only. The drug addict who passed out in his car after buying a 44 ounces Big Gulp and a bunch of those energy pills. The same person who once a month would steal a 12-pack, but because he was part of the manager's family, blind eyes were turned. Story 14. One night during a floor set at VS, we were throwing away trash and going in and out of the stockroom, cleaning the floor, removing merchandise, counting registers, opening boxes, etc. We had music blaring and were singing, goofing off while working, and all of a sudden, some lady walks out to the register and wants to purchase her items probably about 45 minutes after we closed and did the nightly routines of clearing out the fitting rooms, recovering the store, vacuuming. None of us knew she was there. None of us saw her. She wasn't in the store. She wasn't in the back. Not in the bathroom. Not under tables. We think she may have been hiding in the ceiling in the dressing room waiting for us to leave so she could rob the store. But since she realized we weren't leaving, she thought it best to come out. It was the absolute scariest moment. I think there were 12 of us in the store that night all over the place and none of us saw her. What if she had a gun or a knife? Or Saarbrücken? She totally could have gone through our personal items and taking things, but she paid for random things and left. She acted like nothing out of the norm was going on. Story 15. Years ago, I was a night shift CNA for an assisted living facility. I had a resident that had a wild week. She didn't have dementia/Alzheimer's either, so it added more weirdness to this situation. It was about midnight when I was doing my rounds when she bursted out of her room holding her giant cross and looked white as a ghost. I asked her what's happening. Did you have a bad dream? She replied after she caught her breath that was someone in her room telling her to get out. Now we have wanderers in our facility, and I looked around in her room thinking one may have spooked her. I found nothing. She followed me around that night and didn't go off to bed until 4 a.m. I thought that was the last of it. I was wrong. The next night it happens again. She once again claims a man is in her room telling her to leave. Once again, I check her room and find nothing. This is where things got really weird. One night when I was in the back helping a resident, my buzzer went off that the front door was opened. I quickly finished up what I was doing and bolted to the front door. Those doors are locked at night. When I found the corner to the front office, I see her standing outside with the door wide open. She was looking at the sky in awe. I asked her what she was doing as it was 2 a.m. at this point, and she looked at me, put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Death is coming for X." I had to let him in. I coaxed her in the building with a cup of decaf coffee and some biscuits. She told me about the man in her room again and how he's making it difficult for her to sleep. Curiosity got the best of me, and I asked if she can tell me what he looks like. I really don't believe in the paranormal. I feel like everything can be explained, but I can't explain how she accurately described a resident who lived in her room years ago. He was an angry man who didn't want to be in the facility in the first place and passed away after refusing his medication. He didn't like anyone in his room except a few CNAs. She even got his name right. Her family started getting concerned for her well-being and asked to have her transfer rooms. After she was moved down the hall, her nightmares stopped. I asked the other PCWs and CNAs if any of them mentioned anything about the previous resident in her old room. All have stated they didn't. Story 16. Used to work overnight at Walmart. I was tasked to stock automotive that night, furthest corner of the store away from my other coworkers. One of the few times I wasn't listening to music with earbuds in, so I would have heard if someone was near me messing with crap. The doll aisle is only a few feet away from where I'm stocking. I walked past the aisle coming from the warehouse, and a doll on the opposite end of the aisle started crying, scared the black off me. Story 17. Never have been a believer in anything paranormal/ghost/scary stuff. Always thought this stuff was just BS. Until now. A couple weeks ago, I started working graveyard shift at a plant that fills cylinders with different gases, oxygen, different medical gases, gas for welding, that sort of thing. During the shift, it gets very, very dark, and it's just me and 2 other guys. Working graveyard is different. It's like a different reality, a different dimension. Things are just different. Anyway, years and years ago, there was an accident at the plant where 2 or 3 men lost their lives due to human error. Since then, there have been huge safety updates to ensure it never happens again. Outside of our plant, we have a bunker. It's where we store filled cylinders in case there is a leak, or Grugzing. It's all outside. About once a week, I see people who are not there, people who are not real. Sometimes when I'm on the forklift outside alone, moving pallets, I will see a man in the bunker watching me. I will drive to him thinking it's a coworker, but there is no one there. Sometimes I will see a man taking a break by leaning against the cylinders, wearing the old-style uniforms and looking like he's from an old movie. They are 2 different men, different builds. They are also 100% not my coworkers. I assume they are ghosts or spirits of the men who passed at the plant. They are calm and do not scare me. They are just watching us work, taking breaks and relaxing. Edit. No, I am not breathing the gases to everyone asking. We have extremely strict safety procedures in place and state-of-the-art ventilation running around the clock. I would not work here if I was inhaling any gases of any kind. Story 18. A coworker who ate a bunch of bananas every single night, not one, a whole bunch from the supermarket, not really freaky, but definitely baffling, would also regularly offer me banana, despite me saying every time I'm allergic to them, so no thanks. Just bizarre. He also had a drawer in his desk just stuffed full of staplers, which I know doesn't sound that weird in an office, but it was at least 20 staplers, none of which had staples in them, and I never saw him use one even once. Our printers had an automatic staple function, so they weren't needed at all. Story 19. Worked at a movie theater in high school. A few really messed up things happened there, but this one is freaky fun. The staff were mostly funny, quirky, wholesome kids who didn't really drink or party, so we all made friends and would go out after shifts to hang at IHOP or somebody's house. One night, I had a closing shift with some of my favorites, and most of us worked the opening shift the next morning. It's already past midnight, and we're all hopped up on free Coke, a cola. So we went to Elle's house nearby to play flashlight tag. Teenagers don't need sleep. Elle lives right next to a nature preserve. We played around outside for a while, and when the sun started coming up, we all took her dog for a walk in the preserve. It has a dirt road with trails off the sides. Right before we got to the trail, we saw a dead possum in the road. The dog ran up to sniff it, but then came straight back to us. We sort of crept up to it and saw Grugzing crawling around inside its belly. The possum had died on impact, but it had babies in its pouch. who were still alive and trying to stay warm. They were covered in sort of a yellow goo and smelled terrible. Really sad. Well, there's not much we can do. So we continued walking a loop through one of the trails. Everybody was quiet. When we got back to the road, the possum was still there and the babies were still alive. Long story short, I brought home a Cessport box of baby possums at 6 a.m., gave them to my mom, and went off to work the morning shift a few hours later. Love you, Mom. Story 20. I worked at the ArcLight, bougie movie theater, and I'm a night person, so I usually got the last shifts, which meant I had to clear out every theater and then make sure all the trash bags hidden in the back hallway were clear and clean for the morning crew. The only freaky experience I had was hearing someone running throughout the hall, laughing and just being ducking weird. I thought it was a patron who was drunk, but it lasted for a good half hour, even though I had already called security to come escort them out. The security guards also heard the constant running footsteps, and we only ever caught glimpses of the back of the person. Scared the crap out of us. Next day, I pull another night shift and see one of the guards who was on duty. He said they never found the guy, and eventually the footsteps and laughing stopped. Still don't know what to make of it, but that was the only time anything like that ever happened. Story 21. Not a strict nighttime worker, but working at night. I worked for my county morgue. I would retrieve a body and bring it to the morgue. My coworker and I are talking as we are leaving the building. It's maybe 2 a.m. I'm facing him at the end of a long hallway. He is facing me. Behind me, a giant glass door. Just out of the corner of my eye, I see a black mass peek out of one of the autopsy suites and pop back in. I looked over his shoulder but shrugged it quickly before he said, "You saw that, right?" He had seen what I saw in the reflection of the glass door. We went down the hallway to find the building completely empty. When we leave, we are responsible for locking up. We hightailed it out of there, knowing damn well what we had just experienced. My company was a third-party contractor, so we did other forms of body removal, including removals for funeral homes. At this particular funeral home, I had heard stories of people having experiences here, but never any of my own. It's about 3 a.m. on this call, and I drop the body off in the embalming room. When we clean up our equipment, we spray it down with disinfectant spray and give it a quick wipe. For whatever reason, I felt impelled to treat this body with much more respect than others. I treated all bodies with respect. But for some reason, I felt the need to go above and beyond for this soul. I took extra care of him and clean extra thoroughly of my equipment. Things that we touch that aren't typically washed in our cleanup. I'm leaving the building, and as I am walking out of the door, a whisper in my ear says, "Thank you." My heart drops as I know I have to turn around to lock the door behind me. No one was there, and no one lives in the funeral home. I was the only one there. I hightailed it out and refused to go there alone since. Story 22. I worked at a hotel with a huge banquet room for parties of 300, 400 people. It was a weeknight, and typically the hotel has low guest count and no people in those rooms, so we turned the lights off. I was walking through that room to cut through and saw the outline of a person leaning against the wall at the other end of the room. I thought it was another worker named Simone, since he typically hung around that area since it connects to the pool to the hotel. I gave a head nod and said, "What's up?" No response, weird, went about my way and left the room. Came back 10 minutes later and saw the same shadow outline standing there against the wall, and I said, "What's up?" and still no reply. So I began to walk over, and it became clear it wasn't Simone. I turned and left the room, finding it weird that someone was just standing in the banquet room with barely any lights on and not responding. The next day, I asked Simone if he was in the room yesterday, and he said he wasn't working yesterday, and neither was the other pool attendant. Story 23. A strange-looking fox. Its face literally looked like it had a pixelated skull superimposed over the top of it. I work in an animal shelter and was out doing the morning dump checks, checking the perimeter for any dumped pets overnight, and had one of our resident dogs with me, who was absolutely oblivious to the strange-looking fox perched on the wall opposite. I watched it for a while, half expecting the skull thing to disappear in the way that exhaustion-induced hallucinations do, but it didn't. It was shimmering in the moonlight. I eventually finished my checks and continued walking up the road and could still feel this thing's eyes burning into my back. I turned around and it was still there, watching. Our dog finished its morning toilet, and I turned around to head back with this thing still watching me. Usually foxes run off at the sight of humans, but this one stayed. Obviously, the logical explanation is it was sick with a skin condition, giving the fur around the face a skull-like appearance, and it didn't run away because it was dying or too ill to move, and I'm generally not scared of foxes. But this thing terrified me, and I'm still shuddering now at the thought of it, several years later. The other explanation I have, shapeshifter. Story 24. As a taxi driver in Glasgow, I once watched Donatello, TMNT, kick the utter Schmidt out of Super Mario, while escortee Alice in Wonderland stood by shouting, "Ducking, leave it, Tom! He's not ducking worth it! Best Halloween ever!" Story 25. I copied this from a previous post of mine. I used to work the overnight shift at a water treatment plant that first began treatment in the early 1920s. We were believed to be the oldest continuously operating plant in the state. I was the only one in the plant from 2300, 0700. Many security features would inform me of someone's arrival outside of normal business hours. That said, here were my experiences. Sounds. Many times while sitting at my desk, I would hear music playing softly from the next room. There was no radio/speaker/audio source in the room that would otherwise explain where the music was coming from. It was older music, big band, jazz in genre. Too faint to actually make out a particular song or artist. There was no set time, although it seemed to happen the most between the hours of most of the time I would stand up from the desk to investigate. I would make it almost to the doorway and the music would stop. The last time this occurred, as I stood up, there was a very clear and close growling type of noise and the music stopped before I even walked away from the desk. Until then, I had mostly attributed this to my mind playing tricks on me. When I first started the overnight shift, I heard conversations between a man and a woman while standing at the sink. The source seemed to be coming from the entryway, which was behind the sink. It was too faint to make out what the conversation was about, but there were two distinct voices. When I walked into the entryway, the conversation would stop. Again, this was when I had first started working overnight. I chalked it up to my mind messing with me. On numerous occasions, and quite frequently, doors would slam shut from areas of the plant that were unoccupied. Some of them could be from pressure changes or wind, but others had been held open with door stops. Smells. There were a few instances of unexplained smells in the older portions of the plant. One night, for instance, walking into the main entryway from the filter galleries, there was a distinct smell of a woman's perfume as I stepped through the door. I walked about 5 feet into the entryway and then turned back through the door into filter gallery. The smell was gone. Going through the security records and cameras proved that I was the only one there. On 2 occasions, I had an odor of rot decay while walking from the entryway to the bathroom area. The bathrooms were clean, and being the only one there, I can attest that there would be no cause for the odor coming from the bathroom. In any event, it wasn't a sewage smell, but rather a rotten flesh sort of an odor. Again, I would walk through the door maybe once or twice, and the smell will be gone. Sightings. I, personally, had only had one unexplained sighting, again in the oldest portion of the plant. I was standing outside in the parking lot when I saw a shadow moving across the oldest of the filter galleries. It was large and darker than a shadow should be, and moved quickly. Being that security was one of my job functions, I had to investigate. After searching from the top floor to the bottom, I concluded that I was the only one there. There were large windows in the filter gallery, which is how I was able to see the figure in the first place. But there was no light source that I could come up with to explain what I saw. Co-workers had claimed to see figures standing in the windows on the 2nd floor, offices, or 3rd floor, storage areas of the plant. I never saw anything personally, although I won't discredit what they experienced, as they aren't people that would pull pranks. Lastly, there were numerous times that lights had been turned on, off, without explanation. This mainly occurred on the 3rd floor, storage area in the oldest portion of the plant. While making rounds, I would look into the windows to see that lights were turned on upstairs, but were already off when I walk up to shut them off. Story 26. Back in the day, I was a security guard. My job was to watch the corporate pool and park at night. This was out in the boonies. Every hour I had to walk the parameter and key this clock thing. It could get spooky at times. One night I was walking the parameter and it felt like Sagrugzing was watching me from the woods. I thought it was my imagination, but I couldn't get it out of my head. My second trip around I was walking and I heard Sagrugzing in the woods. Sagrugzing big. I was scared. So much so I left work a couple hours early. No one ever checked in. The next day when I was checking in at the main Juard house at the factory, they asked if I saw the cow. It turns out a cow got free from a nearby farm and wandered into the park. I'm pretty sure I was stalked by a dairy cow. Story 27. I worked as a bartender for about 5 years. I would usually get out around 3 a.m., 4 a.m. on weekends. One bar I worked at was next to a small portion of the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. It was a Saturday night. Some of my friends would usually hang out with me at the bar until I got out. So we were all talking and I was moving some just cleaned glasses around. I randomly looked outside and saw 2 red dots in the woods about maybe 4 inches apart from each other, but evenly leveled. So I'm staring at these things thinking, what the heck are those, when all of a sudden the 2 dots rose up about 7 feet in the air, and I could see that the red things were probably eyes, because I saw a silhouette shape of Sagrugzing crouching underneath them when it suddenly stood tall. It was blacker than the darkness around it in the woods, so it was the darkest thing I've ever seen. Suddenly it turned to its left and started walking farther into the woods. Of course, none of my friends saw it. I didn't have time to point it out, so they didn't believe me. But I know what I saw. Story 28. A place I worked at until midnight, which used to be a nunnery. The radio would turn on by itself and we would hear footsteps and voices coming from nowhere. It had quite a history and a weird atmosphere which made it freaky at nighttime. Story 29. Years ago, I worked for myself doing floor cleaning and waxing. A friend of mine asked me if I would do the floor of the meeting hall at his church. The church was from the late 1700s and was surrounded by an old cemetery. I would get there around 4 a.m. and finish by 6 or 7. My friend would usually come by around 6:30 with an egg sandwich, and we'd have breakfast together as I finished. One night, it was raining really hard and thundering and lightning. I was working and listening to music with my headphones like I normally did. As one song ended, I could hear a lot of banging like someone was moving furniture in the adjoining offices. Office cleaners had come in the same time as me once or twice, so I thought it was them. The noise went on for a while. When my friend came by with breakfast, I told him about the noises. He said the cleaners were let go months before, and a church member did the cleaning during the day. We walked back and looked at the offices, and everything was as expected. Then my friend told me that there were rumors the church was haunted, but he had never experienced anything. That was my last time working there. Story 30. Night shift nurse here. It isn't freaky anymore because you get used to a lot of things with this job, but when you have a patient with dementia that sundowns, fairly alert and oriented during the day, much more confused at evening night, and you walk by their room at 3 a.m. and hear this normally sweet old lady just cackling at the darkness. Story 31. I arrived at work at 4:30 a.m. to find a tall, dark figure standing in the front doorway. I ran back to my car and locked the doors. The man didn't move from the doorway. I wasn't really sure what to do, so I waited for the next employee to arrive. We cautiously approached the front door together, both wondering why this guy had been standing there like a creeper. Then we realized it was because he was a vampire. Edward, I think. I worked in a restaurant, and the night shift had put up a life-size promotional display figure of one of the Twilight vampires, but they'd neglected to inform the morning crew. I guess it's a really good thing I didn't call the cops, but it would have been a funnier story if I had. Story 32. Obligatory, not me, but my mom, she was working in a gas station, the only one open 24/7 in my tiny hometown. Well, while she was working, she looked outside the huge front window and saw 2 naked dudes just walking in front of the station. She stood there in shock, then called 911, but she said it was really funny. Other times, she was working same shift. Some chick decided to shoplift a bottle of wine, I believe it was, and the woman just fled. My mom's boss had been told to hit the emergency button in case this happened again, so she did. Little did she know 5 police patrol cars come lights flashing, guns drawn, the whole shebang. For a simple shoplift, the police wasn't pleased about it. Okay, the second one could be filed under malicious compliance. After that, my mom never touched that button again. Story 33. Around the time that Trump had said so grogzing about North Korea, like returning fire and fury, I was working night shift, and SpaceX had done a night launch, although I wasn't aware of it. So I'm walking from one building to another and look up at the sky to see this fiery rocket trail. And I'm like, oh, duck, North Korea is responding. And that makes no sense in a lot of ways, but it was my first thought. After a minute of panicky Googling, I realized that SpaceX was doing a launch, and I had a good laugh. That became one of my favorite things about working night shift, watching night launches. Story 34? I've shared this story before, so apologies of it sound familiar. Used to work night shifts at a nice hotel in San Francisco back in the early 90s. I worked both check-in and check-out since it was an overnight shift. There was this guy in his early 20s who looks like Marky Mark, really ripped, tan, and wearing an Armani suit with no shirt underneath. He keeps coming and going all night and giving me little updates every time he comes back. He's bringing in escorts 2 at a time, and not all of them women, obviously. As appalling as he sounds, he was actually a really funny, charming guy. He won me over when around 1 a.m. he says, I was just down the street at Hotel Diva partying, and I go in the men's room and Lars from Metallica is in there. He mouths off so pow I break his jaw. I hate Metallica too. And later confirmed through the Gavine that Lars did in fact have his face busted up by someone. So cool. Anyhow, the kid keeps going until 3 or 4 a.m. Then in the morning, I'm checking people out of the hotel, and this very nice, unassuming couple is checking out from the suite attached to the guy's room. I ask then if anyone else was staying with them, and they say, oh, that's our son. Story 35. Working, I got home around midnight. Get out of my car, and I see a tan dog across the street past the streetlight. We have a tan feral rescue dog who likes to burrow under the fence and escape, so I call to him. He starts walking towards and gets about 30 feet away. He stops. I stop. It's a coyote. Story 36. I used to run a small bakery that was kind of hidden and quiet in MD. I would get there at 4 a.m. alone, and it was pretty creepy. The actual bakery where I baked the goods was across a small alley from the store, so I was always running back and forth setting up the shop. One day I walked outside with a basket of cookies, and there was an elderly woman walking towards me holding a newspaper, and she said, "Here's your paper." I took it and said thank you and realized she had no escorts on. This was wintertime. She turned and started walking away. I quickly opened the door and put the paper and cookies inside and went to see if she was okay, and she was totally gone. I looked for her, but she was gone. I literally had my eyes off of her for 30 seconds. This bakery pretty much only got business from regular customers, and I knew everyone by name that came in. and I asked everyone about her and described her, but nobody knew who she was. I contacted the police that morning in case she was missing or had dementia, but nothing ever came of it. In the years of working there, I've never seen a soul there early in the morning, and we did not have a newspaper delivery subscription. Story 37. I work closing shift at a local gas station. This happened a couple nights back. Night was going smooth. Mid-shift left a bit early to go get ready for his new apartment, so I had the store to myself for 2.5 hours. Usual suspects, people coming in and just buying some cigs or using the bathroom. Slow and steady until about 45 minutes before close when we went dead. I decided to close up a bit early so I could do my paperwork and go to bed so I wouldn't be too tired for my doc's appointment the next day. This is when things got weird. We had some creep waiting by the back door of the building, saw him on cams. Not really doing much until about 15 minutes before I close when you can see him open the back door from the outside. I knew for a fact it was locked and an alarm goes off and it does open without a pin. Thinking the dude's drunk, I go back there and see what's up, but no one is there. I check cams, corners, everything. I continue closing once I'm sure no one else is in the building, and it's about 5 minds beforehand when I hear what sounds like someone getting a drink in the connected subway, which closes 3 hours before we do. I go to the gate and say hello, checking if anyone's over there. No answer. I'm panicking at this point, thinking if I call the police and someone is inside, they'll just kill me. I finally lock the front doors and am signing off machines after paperwork. It's 5 minds after closing, and my ride is ready and waiting. I'm going to clock out when the phone rings. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail since we are closed. Dude immediately hangs up. Phone rings again. Unknown caller this time. Goes to voice and hangs up. Immediately phone rings again. Except this time just unknown, no number or nothing. I pick up this time thinking, this is nothing ill, tell them we are closed. I answer and say the name, PF the store. Couple seconds of silence, a deep breath on the other end, then good, asterisk, click, asterisk. I run out to the car and tell my roommate no time to explain, just asterisk, go asterisk. We get home safe and I call the next morning to see what was up. Cams are blacked out for the last hour of the night and come back 15 minutes after I left. Phone had no record of the calls and audio is scuffed. I'm convinced I'm cursed now. Boss thinks it's a glitch. Nothing like that has happened since. Story 38. Used to work after hours as a help desk technician for quiet a few years. Saw plenty and heard plenty of weird things. UFOs, weird knocking, conversations where no one would be there, among some other high strangeness. Weirdest one, though, was a bit more persistent. I used to work with a guy named Eric for a couple of years. It was time for my break, so I put myself in a code, got up, and headed outside to have a cigarette. Around that same time, Eric came out as well. We talked for a minute before I headed back in and began walking towards the restroom. We were at the very far end of the building, and our desks were near an exit. To get to the nearest restroom, though, you would need to walk down this really long hallway row of desks, make a turn, and you'd be there. As I'm walking down the hall, I get the feeling that someone is behind me, but I don't pay much attention to it. As I'm about to make my turn, I glance behind me, and I see it's Eric. I don't think anything of it. Maybe he has to go as well. As I enter, I'm expecting him to come in and follow me at any moment, but he doesn't. Strange, but maybe he went somewhere else. I head out, walk back to my desk, and sit down to clock back in. As I do so, I see Eric walking back in from the exit and going back to his desk. Sogruk Singh felt weird about the situation, and so I asked him about it. He claimed that he was outside the entire time, and our other coworkers confirmed this. They would have seen him come in, because, again, we were right by the exits. I brushed it off, though, figuring maybe I didn't see him, or maybe they were messing with me. This is where it got strange. Eventually, the project we were working on went away. I got transitioned to another project, but Eric did not. Over the course of the years, though, I would see him, whether I was working nights or days. The first time I saw him walking across the parking lot. Another time I was walking past the break room, saw him, didn't register immediately, checked back, and didn't see him. I'd see him walking past a row of cubicles. It was like seeing the ghost of someone who was alive. Never made sense to me. Never understood why this one particular person would have a presence persist there. Story 39. Worked at a gas station in high school was my first job. Gas station was a 7-11 out in bumduck nowhere. And if that isn't cliche enough, I'd only been working there a week. It was about 1 a.m. and it was me and this cute college-age girl. A loud ass, up 150 with a diesel engine pulls into the parking lot, and the girl starts having a panic attack, grabs me by my shoulders and says, "Please, don't tell him I'm here," and flings herself into the main office. Big guy comes in, looks like he walked right out of a Fast and Furious movie. Buzz cut, prison tats, wife beater, whole 9 yards. Walks up to the checkout and looks around. "Can I help you?" I ask. He stares me down. I'm not a coward, but I'm not the toughest bird in the tree either. His eyes full of hatred, he says, "Thought someone would be here. I'll come back later." He buys a bag of Doritos and leaves. Girl comes out of the office, sobbing her eyes out, waddles over to me and wraps her arms around me, grabs my head and plants a kiss right on my lips and says, "Thank you. Keep in mind, I don't know this girl, and also I'm technically a minor. 17. Found out years later through some impromptu sleuthing that the dude used to basically be her pimp. He was her boyfriend, but he rented her out to other dudes to make money. She was running from him, and he'd literally tracked her across the state. Don't know what happened to him or with their situation, but I do know she started banging another employee and quit not long after I did. I worked at the gas station for 2 years. Story 40. I worked at a sandwich shop that closed at around 10 p.m., 22 o'clock for my non-American friends. I was closing when a man walked into my shop. He was covered in blood. I literally immediately went into the back and called an ambulance. He had been in a car accident down the road and had gotten a serious head injury. He came in a couple weeks later and had recovered enough to leave the hospital. Story 41. Years ago, I needed to lose weight. Do again, but besides the point. So I started going to the gym that opened at 4:40 a.m. to ride a bike and then work out and then walk. When I got the idea, hey, what if I walk there and back and don't have to ride the bike and the stupid treadmill while I watch Gone? And so I did. It was, at first, a 45-minute walk each way, which I got down to 30 after about 6 months. And I would have the weirdest times as I walked this one section of road. I would be scared by rabbits running from me. It's 3 saugrugsing, and I have headphones on, so forgive me for being jumpy. A really large black snake that they call a coach whip that I thought was a rubber hose laying on the side of the road, and learned that they like to pop up about chest high and chase you. Thought I was going to die. Weirdly, the occasional car would appear and sometimes try to pick of the fat guy walking. I started carrying a blade with me because, yes, pronos start that way sometimes, but so do slasher flicks. At the 3-month mark, I am down to about 38 minutes and have been chased by dogs, chickens, and once a hissing opossum. And then one morning I heard, over my Eden music and my M-Up3 player, by a distinct moo. I will tell you that my mind was not on the walk. I was sort of on daydream autopilot, but the moo made me stop and look. And there was about 24 cows all over the road, and several dozen more in the trees in the field where the rabbits always scared me. And I think, well, this isn't good. It wasn't. Those things chased me for about a block. My best time to the gym was just over 20 minutes. I called the police when I got to the gym and explained to the 911 operator that I wasn't high. The woman running the gym that early told her that I wasn't high, just sweating like I had been chased by cows. They had to get every officer in the city and county to come and help get them back into the pasture they escaped from. They were still at it when I was walking home, and damned if one of them didn't make another try for me. Story 42. A guy coming into the gas station, heading straight to the restroom, and then quickly walking out the store, never even making eye contact. Because he was a bit odd, I go to check out the bathroom to make sure he didn't do anything weird or gross in there. He, in fact, did do sagrugzing, both weird and gross. Blood-tinted water everywhere, along with a dead bird in the toilet. Story 43. I've been a pizza delivery driver a few different times in my life, which includes working some late nights. One night, I was closing on a Saturday, and I took a delivery pretty close to closing. I left the store around 12:45 a.m. That late, the only customers who ordered from our store were hotel guests. There were several in our delivery radius, but some were much sketchier than others. The Motel 6 on a divided highway was on the sketchier side, and that's where my run was to. I went to the door, and a man and a woman answered. I couldn't exactly determine their relationship, but my best guess is sex worker and client. They were both definitely on groogs of some kind, but the lady was at least a functional human being. The guy probably didn't even know what planet he was on, could barely keep his eyes open, was barely speaking audibly, and was having trouble standing. When I gave him the slip for him to sign, he dropped the pen on the floor and couldn't pick it back up. She eventually had to do it for him. While this is happening, they're both talking nonsense to me about the afterlife and crap, and about what happens when you die and stuff like that. But then the lady said, "This place, it's haunted for sure. This is Motel 666 Heta." The guy pipes up, and in the clearest speech he's mustered in this interaction says, "Oh, it's true, the other day, I got possessed and starting acting like a 5-year-old kid. I finally got out of there sufficiently creeped out. After all that, I still got a $0 tip." TL Dr. Crackheads at a hotel talked gibberish at me about the afterlife, said the place was Motel 666, and then claimed he got possessed by a 5-year-old kid and stiffed me on a tip at the end of it. Story 44. When I was about 8, my grandpa shot himself. My whole family was in hysterics, but wouldn't tell me or my siblings what was happening. Shortly after, my mother and I went to his house to spend the night to make sure my grandma was okay. We both slept in the living room. In the living room, there were 2 great big recliners, one for my grandma and one for my grandpa. I woke up in the middle of the night to see my grandma asleep on her recliner and my grandpa slowly rocking back and forth on his while holding her hand. I thought it was sweet and fell back asleep. In the morning, I was finally told what happened, and for a while, I was terrified. Fast forward years later, and my grandma left the house to my mom, and now she lives there. We found an evidence bag in the closet with my grandpa's watch that he always wore. It was covered in blood. It freaked me out, but my mom told me that he would always protect us. Sometimes I do feel his presence, and it's not evil or spiteful at all. Turns out he was about to be sent to a nursing home and so he'd never have to leave his family. His ashes are on our fireplace, and his recliner still remains in our living room. I like to think that he is actually protecting us in his old house. Edit. Spelling errors. Edit 2. Confusion with grandparents' names, so I just reduced them to Grandma and Grandpa. Story 45. I used to be a night manger for Sonic. I'd just been through a pretty bad breakup. We had been together for a long time and basically lived as though we were a married couple. One night I was in the back parking lot smoking and saw a man walking around picking up change. I went to bring him my jar of change I keep in my car. He insisted I not give it to him, but I did, just asked to being my jar back. About an hour later, he brings the jar back. It's still full, and he put a $5 bill and a little newspaper clipping with a quote circled. I can't remember exactly what it said, but hit pretty close to home at the time. We talked for a while, and turns out he's a writer. He told me he used to do mission work with kids in other countries. He said he picks up change to remind himself to stay humble. It really made me re-look at my situation and gave me a way better outlook on life from then on. Story 46. Nurse for 22 years. The night our trauma ICU was invaded by raccoons. Someone went out for a smoke and left the door open. I was so glad all my patients were sedated, intubated, and ventilated. I also want to thank the police officer's wife. He had to babysit a gangbanger who was shot in neck, who would fill a hockey bag full of treats, meals, and bags of chips. We used Doritos to lead Raccoon Army out. They hiss like cats. Very scary bandits. Story 47. Husband's story, not mine. Back in the day when he was a newly qualified nurse, and the only male one on the ward, patients and their families would pass on thanks to the male nurse that spent the night taking to the patient in a private room. Only thing was, no men had been on duty overnight. Once or twice, you would think the patient was confused, but this happened often enough and with patients that were perfectly lucid that you had to think twice about what was happening. I really am surprised they don't set more horror films in hospitals. The long echoing corridors, on-site morgues, definitely creepy. Story 48. I'm an insomniac, although it is mostly under control now. To pass the night away, I used to walk around the city all night from about midnight until sunup. One night I was walking through a neighborhood when I saw someone who looked to be wearing a fur coat going through a wheelie bin. As I got closer, So Gruxing looked wrong, but I was distracted by a guy walking toward me. He was carrying a Slim Jim and opening the doors of all of the cars he walked past. He didn't take anything from the cars. He just opened the door, left it ajar, and moved on to the next car. I didn't want to get closer to him, but I didn't want to cross the street either, so I just froze. The door opener guy stopped in his tracks too and turned toward the wheelie bin. He says, "Raccoon." And I turned to look, and sure enough, it was the largest raccoon I'd ever seen. As we were looking at the raccoon, I was distracted by a light in the window, the house behind the raccoon. There was a man standing in the window completely naked and tumescent, also watching the raccoon. The raccoon turned to look at us and then waddled away down the middle of the street. The guy opening doors then went into the house we were standing in front of, and the naked guy turned off his light. I was left standing alone on the sidewalk, wondering if I had just witnessed some elaborate performance art. Story 49. Not so much freaky, but more just random and uncomfortable. Worked night shift at a supermarket. At about 2 a.m. one night, we all went on break, about 10 of us in the store at the time. When we were walking out of the store to the break room, I saw someone still stacking things on a shelf. He was about 15 meters away from me. I called out to him saying it's break time, but then I realized I didn't recognize him. I yelled out to the manager, and he came over to me and said everyone else had gone out back and that guy wasn't a worker and should be there. The manager called over the speaker for all staff to come to the front of the store, and the guy didn't move. He just kept stacking the shelf. When everyone got to the front, 5 of the guys went to confront the guy, and as soon as he saw them coming towards him, he took off running out the back and squeezed through a hole in the back fence by our loading bay. Manager blocked up the hole with some pallets and checked the rest of the store for anyone else. But it was all clear. When he checked the camera footage, we say the guy come though the whole walked casually into the store and just started working. He had put about 10 or so boxes onto the shelf in their right place. He didn't steal anything, and we didn't get any good photos of him from the cameras because he had a hood on and a baseball cap and kept his head down the whole time he was in the store. I think they just assumed he was a drunk or high on Saugruggsing and was maybe going to steal Saugruggsing, but then tried to blend in when he noticed all the workers waking past him to go on break. Story 50. I'm a hospital security officer, and the amount of weird crap I see in the surveillance cameras is astounding. One night, while on rounds, I walked past the basement loading bay, and those door was open. Lights were off. It was 3 a.m. This door should be locked and lights on. So I do a check to make sure nobody's inside. Check the exterior doors, all locked. So after I turned the lights on, I locked the door and continued my rounds. I get back to my desk at around 0330, and I see it. A very obvious man standing just in view of the camera. Just enough that you could see the top of his bald head and his eyes on the bottom left, just staring into the camera. I do a double take because the housekeeping manager doesn't get in until 0400, but maybe he was early. So I walk back downstairs and the loading dock door is open again. Lights off. I'm crapping my pants at this point because it legit takes a minute to go from my desk to the basement. There's not a chance in hell someone managed to get in and out that fast. I turn on the lights and shout, "This is security. Make yourself known." No answer. So I do another check. The exterior door is still locked, but I also notice a stack of pallets sitting where that man I saw would have been standing. There's no way. The guy would have had to have been standing inside the pallets to be where I saw him. So I'm totally freaked out. So I lock the door again and sprint my ass upstairs. At 0430, I see the assistant housekeeping manager show up. So I asked, "Hey, did Paul come in early today?" He just looked at me funny and said that Paul was on vacation and had been for over a month. I explained what I saw to him and we both went running to the basement and searched again, but could find anything. That was the freakiest day of my life. It still scares the hell out of me. Story 51. I worked a 12 HR shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. for a trucking company in the IT department. I was the only person in the entire upstairs and after midnight, the only person in the building, running around in between cubicles, passing out reports for the next day in near total darkness. Every once in a while, a random phone extension would begin ringing. It would ring and ring and ring and ring and not stop. I would have to hunt it down and answer it, but there would never be anyone on the line. Would always creep me out. I would ask other operators that worked nights if they experienced the same thing, and they have. A technician for the phone co would dismiss it as a glitch in the switching system, but still creepy. Story 52. I have worked nights for about 11 years. 6 in a homeless hostel and 5 in a mental health setting. I have seen a few freaky things in that time. The most disturbing was Sagrugzing I missed at the time, but lives with me to this day. The hostel was originally a church, so it already had the creepy setting. From the outside, it just looked like an abandoned church. Inside, there were 5 separate landings, one of which was female only and housed 5. This part of the hostel was directly above the office where night staff spent much of the shift. At the end of the shift, the day staff come in and there is a room check done, usually by 2-day staff members. But as we were short-staffed, I agreed to stay on to help out. So I am on the women's landing and knock on the door of a resident. There is no response, so I open the door to find a semi-naked woman who is clearly deceased laying on the floor. Without touching her, I can tell she is stiff and has been dead for a matter of hours. I end up waiting around till the police come in so I can go through the CCTV with them. We had around 24 cameras around the building, but there was only one that they needed to look at. I'm looking at the screen, and we are just expecting to see this poor woman enter her room at a certain time and not leave. However, instead on screen, we see the next-door neighbor of the deceased woman, who nobody has ever seen out of her wheelchair, standing upright, make her way out of her own room, dragging a body along to the other room. The worst part is that at this time, you can see the person she is dragging was still alive at that time. It seems that they had used heroin together, and when her neighbor started to odd, she panicked and dragged her back to her own room. Story 53. I worked at a 24-hour drive-through gas station, usually known for being robbed in the middle of the night. After a lucky streak of never being successfully robbed, thwarted 3 robberies in that time, 2 guys snuck up behind a customer I was serving through the door of the booth I work out of. They grabbed him and pushed him through the open door into me. I leaned into him and tried to push back, totally squishing the guy, but desperately trying to reach the silent alarm in the process. I failed to hit it, and we all fell on the floor. The 2 guys had large knives, and they ordered us into the back room bathroom. The customer had his head forced into a toilet and a knife held on the side of his neck. The other guy, with his knife point pressing into my chest, was ordering me to open the large cigarette safe, about $25,000 in cigarettes. I have no access to this safe, and told him so. They forced me into the front, and I opened the register. The guy absolutely flipped upon discovering there was only about $20, $30 in small change in the register. I had the cash in my pants pocket beneath my coveralls I was wearing. I should not have done this, but it had just been busy. I told them that I put all the cash in a slot that drops into a floor safe that I can't open. They were satisfied and hurriedly filled their hockey bag with every pack of cigarettes we had on display. They took off, and I slammed that silent alarm button when they were out of sight. The customer came out of the back room dripping of toilet water, obviously freaked out. I said, "That was ducking nuts." He laughed and calmed a bit after that. We chatted until the cops came. I gave him a pack of cigarettes left behind from the robbers before they got there. Edit. There. Story 54. I do a lot of long-distance running, but during winter I have to run at night due to work commitments. I have loads of high-vis gear and a great head torch. But running through trees and wooded areas is still pretty unnerving. I concentrate really hard now, after an incident a couple of years ago. Whilst running at about 11 p.m., I hear a scream coming from the trees. A proper, panicked, anguished scream. I investigated slowly, and because in my head I couldn't be the guy that ran past a murder taking place. As I got closer, I still couldn't really see anything, but could hear some thudding and dragging sounds along with twigs breaking and leaves scattering. It sounded like wrestling in the woods. It was cold, and I remember my breath vapor making the light from my torch distort slightly. I move through a bushy area, and my light catches two pairs of reflective eyes that are charging towards me, so I run like duck out of these, followed my two foxes that had been fighting in the copse of trees. That's how I learned that foxes' warning calls to rivals sound like human screams. Story 55. I work weekend night shifts on a 911 ambulance in a busy urban area, couple off the top of my head. Sitting at a post in a parking lot on the nicer side of town after midnight, spot a shirtless crackhead, skinny as a rail, walking down the edge of the lot with an honest-to-God sword. The thing was a solid 3 feet long and had a duct tape grip. He never looked at us and just kept going until we lost sight of him. Encountered an abandoned car in the middle of the road at 3:30 a.m. Significant damage to the rear of the vehicle. Block traffic. Check for patience. It's unlocked and unoccupied, but there is an AK in the passenger's seat. Plain view. We joked about tossing it in a bag, but the arrival of the fuzz forestalled those plans. Early morning, 2:03 a.m., sitting outside the ER after dropping off a patient doing paperwork. Two men, who apparently were, a couple yelling at each other about who was giving blowjobs to who on the low, who was the bigger cheater, etc., walking up and down the sidewalk outside the ER. Came back an hour later and they were still at it. A call for a man who had reportedly ingested several unknown substances and then eaten a snake. We were like, yeah, right, sure. Get there, and I'll be damned if this dude hadn't done a ton of bath salts plus groogs and gotten most of the way through a approximately 2-foot snake by the time he was stopped. That man got all the sleepy groogs. Night shift is wild. Story 56. I worked a night shift a few years ago in a train station. About 2 a.m., I noticed a street lamp down the street go out. A second later, the whole room went pitch black. I mean, so dark, the first thing I did was tap my chest to make sure I was alive. The magnetic release on the office door was dead, so I was able to just walk out. I could hear banging and turned the corner to see the automatic doors opening and closing repeatedly. The large LED screen behind the barriers, which showed the train's times, was flickering up and down, like the old Nokia game Snake. Just going boogaloo. I went up to the control office, and the nighttime controller said he didn't know what had happened, but the phone lines were down too. I walked around the station, and it was just eerie. The doors were opening and closing for a few minutes, and then stopped. It turned out to be a massive power surge at the substation, which is right next to the station. When I went home at 6 a.m., the electric company and telephone company were still there, trying to fix things. I'll never forget it. Story 57. Used to work as a grocery collector at a supermarket. Customers would order their things online, and we would pick their items in the store and bring them out to their car. I usually worked night shifts. BTW night shifts for me were from 6:10 p.m. One time I was out to go deliver an order. First off, this person's order was really weird. They ordered like 3 toasters, an insane amount of beef giddy, a lot of toilet paper, this is pre-COVID, and a whole bulk of other items. When I got to their car, it was a black Lincoln with pure blacked out windows. Then all 4 doors opened at the exact same time. A white man who had gray hair and looked like he was 50 came out of the driver's door. Then the other 3 doors. 3 black men in various heights and sizes came out. One was very fat, another very skinny and tall, another very short, maybe 5 feet tall. They all greeted me by shaking my hand. The tall one even hugged me for some reason. The white guy driving said, "So you by yourself?" I answered, "Yes," nervously. Then I asked them to open the trunk. They all just followed me over there. I started loading things in, and they just started asking questions like, "So, is your boss around?" And once again, I would reply with, "No, he went home." Other questions like, "So, how many security guys you got working here?" I just answered, "I don't know, maybe 4. After I was done packing, they all just slapped me on the back, saying good job and love the service. Then they all got in and drove away blasting, I think it was Drake. Not sure, it was really weird. Story 58. I was driving home from work one morning at around 3 a.m., half day for me, and I'm listening to a book. I look down for a moment to check the remaining time in that chapter, and then back at the road. I notice headlights in my lane, and think nothing of it for a moment. My phone chirps, and I look down again to see what the notification was, and think to myself, I saw headlights in my lane. I look back up and see very bright headlights rapidly approaching, and swerve just in time to miss the large truck barreling down the highway in the opposite direction. Story 59. Work at a place that made herbal supplements, basically cut-rate vitamins, and MLM garbage. We got a new forklift driver for about a month. Before this guy, all the warehouse shelving was pretty much new. After, not so much. This guy spent every shift going full throttle, though, the warehouse while having loud arguments with Jesus. It became quite dangerous to go back there, yet he had to, as have the machinery was on one side and the rest on the other. First day we complained to boss. Nothing. Next couple of days we complained to day shift boss, management, nothing. By the end of the month, we had someone out on watch to keep track of crazy forklift guy. Groups would only cross the warehouse when that dude was outside. Finally, after a threatened walkout, management said they would retrain him on day shift. Apparently, he was fired after about 10 minutes. He scared the day shift packaging crew so much that one of them stole the keys to his forklift and the rest fled the building. Never got an answer as to what exactly was wrong with the guy or why it took so long to fire him. Later, found out he not only had no certification for forklifts, but had had his license revoked for medical reasons 3 years previous. That place was wild. The 3 years I was there saw knife fights between various different Asian nationalities, just wild. Story 60. My dad used to work as a nighttime janitor at our local mall, and he told me a story about this secluded area of the mall that had a mini carousel, the kind that operates of quarters. He remembers that one night he was just mopping near the secluded area when all of a sudden he hears carnival music, so he goes to check it out, and when he gets there, he finds it empty, but the carousel was on. Story 61. I've told this story once on Reddit. We'll tell it again. I'm a nurse at a big hospital in my city. One night, I'm on call and it's snowing and icing out big time, so I can't go home and I decide to just sleep on the couch in the break room. It's 3 a.m. and I'm kind of in between wakefulness and sleep. I've got the lights off and it's pretty dark. I swear to ducking God, I see this black floating silhouette near my feet on the other side of the couch, which is weird because it was already so freaking dark, but this thing was darker, kind of nebulous. I'm just watching it come towards me and I could feel so much anger from it, like seething jealousy and rage, almost like it was envious of me because I was human. It kept floating toward me and just flew into me, and then I woke up with a startle. I've never felt such unbridled fury. I think it yelled at me. Anyway, that's it. Sometimes I get sleep paralysis, and since I was kind of in between being awake and asleep, I'm sure I just imagined it. But dude, I'm telling you, the bitterness I felt from that thing will stay with me forever. Story 62. I'm currently a university student working on my thesis, and because of this, there are days where I stay way past closing time at the uni laboratory. At about 8 p.m. one night, everyone in the building had gone home except for a coworker, an intern, and myself. My coworker and I were bored and started messing with the intern, telling her that the lab was haunted. We were all having a good laugh until we heard noises in one of the rooms of the lab, which was weird considering. 1, we were the only ones in the building. 2, there was no way someone could have snuck in because they would have had to pass right in front of us to get into that room, and there were no windows in that room. 3, I'd been in that room earlier and locked it when I walked out. We walked towards the room to open the door, and all 3 of us saw in horror as the handle moved slowly, as if someone on the other side wanted to open the door. We ran out of the lab and got the attention of one of the school guards. We told him that we thought someone had snuck into the lab, and he accompanied us to investigate. When we got there, I unlocked the door and opened it only to find it empty. Story 63. When I still had the dairy herd, I would spend the night in the barn sometimes. The situation was this. If I had a cow that was due to calf and she was known for a difficult calving, I would get up, dress, and go out and check on her once every 2 hours. Occasionally, if it was during a cold winter night, I would just take an alarm clock and sleep in the barn. The barn was 45 degrees, so I would set up a straw bale bed on the driveway, use an old coat for a pillow, stay dressed with gloves on, and cover with an old tarp. Usually had a dog and several barn cats pile on to keep me warm. I woke up in the night, I kept the main lights on, with a big tomcat laying on my chest, just staring at me. Story 65. Oh, I actually have one for this. I was working at a mental health facility out in Florida, and it was my first night in pediatrics. Mostly teenagers and stuff that would sleep while the staff just chilled and played games. Some of us were one-on-one, so I'd sit in the hallway just outside the kids' room so I could see him sleeping in his bed without sitting in the room with him. Flight risk. Anyway, one of his neighbors, a 5-foot-tall 13-year-old, comes out of his room and just stares at me. Now it wasn't his nudity or that blank, expressionless stare that had me in shock so much as the foot worth of heat swinging between his legs. My face contorted in a WTF as a coworker came up behind me. "Makes you feel like a man, don't he? Go back to your room, Barry. Not time to get up yet." To which the boy shuffled back into his room. Turns out he was just autistic and has a bad habit of losing track of time. Story 66. Not really a nighttime worker, but I was president of my old condo building. Basically, after hours, all the building problems came to my doorstep. One night, I came home late one night, and our valet was visibly shaken and sheet white. We have 24/7 valet, which at the time was doing rounds around the building like security. I asked him what was wrong, thinking there was an accident or a break-in. He asked me to sit down and watch the video cameras, and he plays a video of our gym. Video starts paying, and you see the punching bag hanging from the ceiling move ever so slightly. And I asked, "What am I looking for here?" He responded, "Keep watching." Then the video shows the punching bag move a good 3 feet side to as if someone is punching it really hard from each side. This happens for 10-15 seconds. Then it stops dead center again. Valet said he ran in there to see what was happening. Set one foot in the gym and saw a little boy standing in the center of the room. I saw him on video feed enter the room and immediately back out in a hurry. Valet called his company and quit on the spot. Our building was seriously haunted. Story 67. I'm a night shift CNA in the memory care unit of an assisted living facility. God, there are so many stories. My particular spookiest resident is one who has very advanced dementia but is still quite able-bodied. She's very tall for an old lady and has a condition that makes her unsettlingly thin. Before I started working there, she was what is known as pleasantly confused, but by now she no longer speaks at all and instead just has a constant, full-grin smile on her face. For whatever reason, when she sundowns, she suddenly feels that everything she does needs to be done as fast as humanly possible, while she is very pleasant during the daytime. It's profoundly unsettling to hear footsteps at 3 a.m., turn around, and see this 6-foot skeleton woman with a blank stare and a huge smile sprinting directly at you. That, or look into her dark room and see her naked, frantically rushing around her bed, pulling the covers up and down over and over again at horror movie speed. Obviously, you have to treat all dementia patients with understanding and respect, but I'd be damned if I said I didn't have to quietly get my heart rate back to normal before helping her some nights. Story 68. I worked the graveyard shift at a 4-star hotel. I was the security dispatcher. I usually had to stay in the office all night, but sometimes I would go for a ride on the electric cart with one of the security officers. I was 18 and this was my first full-time job. One night we were riding the electric cart around the hotel. The scenery was beautiful. The hotel was by the bay. In front of the hotel was a pond with about 7 real flamingos in it. As we made our way to the front, we made a horrible discovery. Someone, somehow without being seen, had decapitated all of the flamingos and took their heads with them. Story 69. I've posted this before, but too good to pass up. Actually happened to one of our guards. She was new to the job and in the middle of the night was patrolling our office building. She got lost and a guy in the maintenance room gave her directions to get out. When she got to the guardhouse, she told the sergeant what happened and the sergeant said there should be nobody in there. When she described him, the sergeant pulled out an ID card from the drawer and asked her if this was the person to which she said yes. It was the maintenance guy for the building who had died the year previous. When I asked her about it, she said, "I know what I saw." Story 70. I used to work nights at a distribution warehouse. One night we were closing down, and as I'm sweeping up, I see everyone standing by one of trailer bays. As I walk closer, I can hear some yelling, and then loud, terrifying screaming. I walk up to the door, and there is a man wedged between a trailer and the door. "Let me in, please! Please, they're after me! Help!" His arm is reaching towards one of the workers, begging us to let him in. My boss goes outside around the opposite way, so he can't see him, and eventually calms the guy down. He also brings him a coat because it's December. And also this guy is shirtless. The police eventually come and tell us that the man had escaped from an inpatient home and they had been looking for him all night. His shirt had got caught on the barbed wire fence he scaled. He also ran through wetlands. Story 71. Not while on the job, but pretty crazy experience. Myself and 3 of my friends went to the haunted castle in Okinawa that is near American Village. It was about 2 a.m. and we were exploring it. And we were going up the stairs to the roof section. Once at the top, one of my friends started shaking and crying and saying she wanted to leave and that Sogrugzing wasn't right. She reaches for her keys to her Jeep and her keys are not in her pocket. So myself and a friend retrace our steps and find nothing. Go back to roof entrance, where she is still shaking while rocking and crying. We start shining our flashlights around the roof and Sogrugzing catches my eye about 20 yards away. Her keys on the very edge of the ledge on this roof with about a 60-foot straight drop to the ground. We grabbed them and ran as fast as possible out of that place. Story 72. I work in a hotel and have seen some stuff. A guy came in, put both hands on the desk and stared through me. I asked him if I could help him multiple times, but he looked like he wasn't there. His mate came in, grabbed him by the arm, and took him out again. Had to check the cameras to make sure that happened. Story 73. Not my story, but my dad's best friend in college. He started a new job working the night shifts at a fishery to help pay tuition. It worked out because he didn't have to do much, so he used the time to study, and then it was a 30 minutes walk home to the dorms. Well, turns out if you're quietly studying for hours and then walk 30 minutes home stinking of fish, the neighborhood cats are really gonna like you. Cats started following him home after a week of working there, and within another week, it was a whole pack of meowing cats following this guy home every night, and then standing outside the dorm window begging. He didn't even feed them. They just were very determined that one day the fish-smelling man would gift them with food. My dad thought it was hilarious and said he got all the pussy, except the kind he wanted. Story 74. I work at McDonald's in the UK, and during the run-up to Halloween, we have a spooky playlist, things like the Addams Family theme, Bad Moon Rising, that sort of stuff. So I'm on an overnight just getting on and doing my cleaning jobs when the theme from The Exorcist starts playing. Okay, I think to myself, a bit of a strange choice considering how uncreepy the rest of the music is, but whatever. As I stand up after cleaning shake syrup off the floor, I see a lone figure shambling across our darkened, empty car park, music still playing. Bearing in mind it's 1:30 on a Tuesday morning, I crap my pants. Turns out it was just a drunk coming for 20 nuggets, but still scared the crap out of me, ha ha ha. Story 75. Graveyard shift in a secure government data center. Midnight shift is 2. Sometimes one person there to monitor the monitoring software and make sure print jobs run. Not uncommon to have police come by and check on things since it was the midnight shift and on not the best side of town. One night an officer comes to the door and asks to be let in to take a look around. He may be State Leo, but they've never asked to come in. There's been no alarms. We're the only people in the building, and well, he doesn't have access. People aren't allowed in. We didn't let him in, and he left. My partner started calling the police. She had been there over 10 years. I was a year in or so, and I asked why. She told me the Leo patch on his arm was old and not what they wear currently. Story 76. I work at a factory, and I'm like 90% sure we have a ghost in the building. Weirdest thing that's happened was when I was the only one in the building one night. I hear a huge crash come from the warehouse side of the building. I go over to investigate thinking a truck driver that came to pick a load hit the building or saw Grugzing. Turns out an entire pallet of product, over 1,000 pounds, was yeeted from the 3rd level racking. Story 77, work at the door. We had someone overdose on the property in the restroom. Some security with first aid gear sprinted by, along with transmissions on the radio to keep the air clear due to the medical emergency. An ambulance finally arrived. Me and the other guy I was working with hauled things out of the way for the paramedics and their stretcher to get through. An otherwise quiet night, so me and the other guy were mulling over the outcome. He wondered if the person that overdosed was going to make it, but as if on cue, the medics and stretcher came back. Empty. We had our answer. No fanfare or conclusion like the movies. The coroner showed up a little later. Story 78. I work nights in a locked Alzheimer's dementia unit. Most nights are quite creepy, knowing how many people have died in the building. Dementia also makes people do strange things. One of my patients will scream for hours on end. She'll be totally fine and happy, but that's just what she does. One night, I was doing my usual rounds and checked in on one of my other patients. I shined my phone flashlight into her room to make sure she was sleeping, but she wasn't in her bed. I shone my light around her room, and she was standing in the corner covered in blood. Cue the screaming lady. Everything in my body was telling me to run. She apparently just had a nosebleed and got confused. Haha. I really do love my job, but it can definitely be spooky. Story 79. I am an in-and-out associate and frequently work closing shifts. So I am there on weekends till about 3 a.m. One night we had just finished cleaning up and we shut off all the lights besides the little ones in the dining room that we keep on. My manager started to scream, so I ran over to her and saw what she was looking at. A hooded figure standing in our dining room staring right back at us at 2:30 a.m. We were tempted to call the cops as he just stood there, and I had a bad gut feeling. Turns out it was a frequent homeless man named Nick who passed out in the restroom with a needle in his arm. From that night forward, I triple-checked the restrooms before locking the doors. Story 80. Working overnight, alone in a large thrift store. Partway through cleaning, I start hearing carnival music. The famous entry of the gladiators you'll remember from every creepy clown movie. I track down the sound to the toy aisle. I hear tinny, muffle music from somewhere amongst all the toys. Suddenly it stops. Nothing. I checked the whole store and found no one or any evidence of another person being present. I did not find the toy either, but I also didn't dig too hard. It was freaky, but my bets were that it was a rodent that bumped a toy. I used to have a video on my old phone. Just me walking slowly forward filming a random aisle while creepy music plays. Story 81. Overnight security guard shift at a tourist-heavy spot in a tourist-heavy location in San Francisco. It's 1:30 a.m.-ish, just getting settled in. We're on the waterfront and it's pitch black. We smell acrid smoke and hear screaming. Go time. A huge bonfire had been lit with what looked like several living human bodies on a pyre and what I think are press cameras surrounding it and the screams. Yes, it was mannequins. Yes, it was a video shoot for some art project. No, they didn't get in trouble. Yes, it scared the crap out of us. Story 82. Ambulance tech, EMT here. One night at 3 a.m., we got sent to investigate an 89 IAO man running naked around a park. We found him hiding in the bushes as a police car pulled up and asked if we'd seen a different naked person, unrelated, on the same street. Surely enough, just up the road was a 25-year-old woman screaming at her ex's house in the road, fully naked. On our way into hospital, I spotted a goddamn third naked person on the same ducking road, also unrelated to the other incidents. IDK what goes on at 3 a.m. on this road normally, but this was the most insane occurrence I've come across. It was also my second ever shift. Story 83? I was working a G-Harvest in 2019. I don't remember the time, but it was dark and we had lights running. I was in the loading area, about 1/4 mile from the crew, and I looked east to where they were working. At that time, I see a bright blue flash. Thinking one of their lights fell down, I started to rush to go check on them. Turns out everything was okay, and none of them saw that flash about an hour later. I get calls from my guys saying there's a large fire on the opposite east end of the valley. It turns out what I saw was a high-energy power line arcing in the wind and causing the Kincaid fire. The next 3 weeks were absolute chaos. Story 84. I worked a security job many years ago. One time they had me work back-to-back 14-hour shifts with no break in between. You can imagine I was pretty much the Walking Dead by the end. In fact, I was so sleep-deprived that I started to hallucinate that a cow was walking by while I was a gate guard. That's right, I hallucinated a freaking cow. It was fully detailed and clear as day. A brown and white cow just walking about and occasionally grazing. Of course, I knew it wasn't real. I remember looking at it and thinking, wow, I really need some sleep. Story 85. I worked in casinos for more than a decade. I've seen fights, drug use, blatant prostitution, and theft. I have known customers who have been arrested for human trafficking, fraud, murder, and links to terrorist financing. I've seen every possible bodily secretion. I've seen affairs start and be discovered, fortunes won, and more often lost. The freakiest thing, I saw someone impact the floor after a multi-story jump off a building. Can't get that one out of my head. Story 86. Was working at a distribution center years ago unloading overseas cargo containers. Typically, all the product was coming from China, Vietnam, etc. I cracked open the seal to a container and a cat ran out and, he ran like he was on fire. He tore off so fast that we lost sight of him almost instantly and didn't even bother to look for him. Best case scenario, he got outside. Worst, we had a warehouse mouser. I hope like hell that cat snuck inside at the US port and wasn't in there since China. Story 87. Literally, just tonight, the strangest thing happened. I'm a delivery driver, and I was delivering to a house at the bottom of a cul-de-sac, and one police van came down to the end with the lights flashing and then pulled to the side. The side doors then slid open, and around 15 armed policemen jumped out and walked around roaming the streets. 20 seconds later, 10 police cars with more armed guards pulled up, and I was trapped. Like, bro, I'm just a delivery driver. Another van came, and more armed guards hopped out. Literally not a minute later, they all got back in their vehicles and drove off. They didn't speak to any of the citizens and just left. Why? I don't know. Story 88. I have been working graveyard for 5 years, and the worst I saw was a ride where it continues to move while everything is closed. The music is on, and the dolls move around still, and it is horrific. My brother works graveyard too, and his freaky story was he was working at a chemical plant, and this homeless guy was sleeping under some stairs, and when he woke him and told him to leave, he crawled out and grabbed his stuff. My brother thought easy enough. A few seconds later, the guy pulls a hatchet and starts swinging at him. Brother ends up tasing him to the ground, and the cops got the guy. Story 89. I work at a gas station. This dude came in towards the end of the night shift. He had what looked like blood on him. Not a lot, but enough for us to be curious. And he was just wandering around the store. We get a lot of drug addicts, so we just kind of watched him and let him be. It was just us, some construction workers, and this guy in the store. Blood guy leaves. Then a few minutes later, the construction workers leave. The construction workers come back in after like a minute telling us to call the police because blood guy stole their truck wild morning. Story 90. I used to work night shift security at a museum that was located next to a pretty busy road. One night, there apparently was a highly intoxicated driver who tried to make a turn at an intersection right in front of our museum. The driver lost control of his vehicle and had a high-speed collision with the spiked fencing that surrounded the grounds. Upon impact, the driver was ejected from his car, hit the spiked part of the fence, and completely decapitated himself. I happened to not be working that night, so I didn't see it with my own eyes. But one of the other guards was conducting an exterior check that evening when they found the body. Story 91. I work graveyard shift, midnight to 8 a.m. as a tow dispatcher. Other dispatchers have said that the yard is haunted and that we have haunted cars parked here. There are a few that are stored for open investigations where people have been murdered in. They have been in our warehouse for decades. The creepiest, most unexplainable thing I've experienced is a few times I'll be sitting and watching TV at about 3:30 a.m. and I'll smell fresh cigarette smoke, followed by a very distinctive cologne, as if someone had a cigarette right outside, then walked through the office. There is never anyone outside. My office is at a dead-end street, and I have 360 degrees camera coverage. Creepy. Story 92. Guy got in an accident, ran his car into a tree, I think. Walked about a quarter mile up the road to step into the Waffle House. I was pulling third shift. The dude was covered in blood. Walks in, asks if we have ducking raisin toast, and then falls down on the floor. Luckily, the firehouse was right around the corner, so we had guys on the scene in like 3 minutes. 2 dudes ran over while a third brought the ambulance. The paramedics said one of the dude's legs was broken. We were all a little amazed. He had walked like 5 blocks from the scene. Story 93. Working for the county police here in St. Louis around 1976. I was on midnights. Around 3 a.m., I went into a 7-Eleven's for some coffee, and when I came out, I saw 2 cows trotting down the road. This was not a rural area. I was about to call this into HQ when a pickup truck with a couple of redneck types came by. One guy was driving and the other was in the bed of the truck with a little skinny hemp rope. "Officer, have you seen our cows?" I pointed down the road and they took off. Never found out what happened to them or the cattle or where they came from. Story 94. Not freaky, but I saw a few nice things. A gas station that dropped the prices for a couple hours around midnight, so a local cab company could fill all the cars at the end of the day. A restaurant. Chain. where the staff was told by head office that all leftovers had to be bagged and taken to the dumpster. Store night manager had them bagging it in to-go bags instead of garbage bags and putting it beside the dumpster instead of in it, so the local homeless people could get a free meal of food the company wanted to waste. Story 95. I used to work super late in central London in an office that overlooked a posh hotel. Our offices were always dark, so guests probably thought the offices were empty and were less than careful about closing curtains. Mostly you'd see people having sex, but once we saw some girl playing a Wii naked and a dude bringing 2 sex workers to the penthouse suite, which was all glass windows. A lot of celebs stay at that hotel, I think, as I had friends who would lurk outside the reception to get autographs. Story 96. Worked at a hospital. Was out on a smoke break with a few of my teammates. We heard a slamming sound and crashing. Looked up in time to see a patient had busted out a window on the 3rd floor and watched the patient jump. They were waiting for transport to a psych facility. Broke out of restraints, assaulted their sitter, smashed through the reinforced window with a chair. It was a big deal. I'll never forget the sound of them hitting the top of the ambulance bay. Story 97. I worked graveyard shift at a hospital and had to help load a dead body someone found under a bridge. It had been there for weeks, and I only say it because I never learned her name. The body bag fell open and the smell was so bad almost every nurse vomited, and I mean projectile vomiting everywhere. It was like a horror movie, pretty far up on my list of ducked up things I've seen. Story 98. Working night shift at the George Washington Bridge, saw a guy pacing back and forth on the pedestrian walkway. He was pacing for a while, so we called Port Authority. The officer told the guy from a distance to think of what he's doing. It's not worth it. Guy just jumped into the Hudson River, found out he was just 21 years old.